David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Over the weekend, as you know, I was totally disconnected from news and politics, but some friends of mine were talking about Trump and politics, and I was sort of just listening. And I started thinking that I would really respect the American right and the Trumpist right way more if they stopped making excuses for Donald Trump. And specifically, I'm talking about the racism and the xenophobia and the incompetence. And if they just said, you know what? Yeah, it's true. He is all of those things. But here's why I still support him, because what I really am trying to get to here is that the pro-Trump right has kind of twisted itself into pretzels with these completely incredible defenses of the things that Donald Trump has said and things that Donald Trump has done. And when it was simply bad policy, it was a little bit easier to hide the total impossibility of their defenses. So I'll give you an example. When Donald Trump passed tax reform with Republicans, and rich people said, we like this because it's going to be great for the economy. That's wrong, right? Like, that's demonstrably wrong. But it's at least true that there are people who think tax cuts for the rich are good for the economy. So what they mean is these tax cuts are good for me, right? But they hide it as these tax cuts are good for the country, even though that's obviously not the case. Okay. When Donald Trump alienates another European ally, that's bad for us. But Trumpists can argue, I don't care because we've been taken advantage of by the European Union for too long. I like that we finally have a president that's going to hold them to account. Now, I would disagree with that. And lots of them are simply hiding behind the reality that they're simply ultra-nationalist anti-Europeans. But at least they have some policy explanation for why they can pretend that Donald Trump is doing something that makes sense. But now, with the last 10 days, on top of the last 2 years, obviously, but the very acute last 10 days of the xenophobic and racist stuff that Trump has been ramping up with, the defenses are not even slightly believable. Trump's whole send her back thing wasn't racist because it was the crowd chanting, not Donald Trump himself. The entire attack on 4 ethnic minority congresswomen wasn't racist or xenophobic because Trump simply wants our country to be good, and he's criticizing anyone who said or did what they've done because he thinks that it's the wrong direction for the country. That's all that it is. It's not racist. It's not xenophobic. These aren't believable defenses, and these aren't respectable defenses. And I am saying, I'm actually speaking to the Trumpists right now. Very often on the show, I say, I know that there are Trumpists listening, but I'm not speaking to them. They're off the deep end. I'm speaking to the reasonable people in our audience. This is different. Okay. I'm actually speaking to the Trumpists here. I would respect you way more if you just told the truth. Okay. And for some of you, the truth is you're also racist and xenophobic. And that's why you like Donald Trump's dog whistles. Just come out and say it. Okay. Stop pretending. Stop couching it all as merely political rhetoric or strategy or a healthy version of nationalism or whatever. Just tell me, I think these things about minorities, and I believe Donald Trump agrees with me, and I like it, and that's why I like him. I would vehemently disagree with you. I would vehemently disagree with what I believe is a disgusting and self-destructive view of human relations on our planet, but I would respect you for just telling it like it is. Or for other people, they don't actually like the racist and xenophobic stuff, but they're playing along because they've calculated that Donald Trump is good for them in some other way personally. Like if you're a rich person who just got this massive, massive tax cut last year because of Donald Trump, just tell me, you know what? I am disgusted by what Donald Trump is saying. It is racist. It is xenophobic, but I'm going to ignore it because the tax cut is just so good for me, or the trade stuff happens to be good for my personal financial interests or whatever. I'd think you were greedy at the expense of what's best for your country, but I would respect you because you're just telling me the truth. When Trump talks about caging children and criminal illegals, and Mike Pence turns his back literally on caged immigrants, don't play the I like this because I'm for strong borders, but I want legal immigrants here. Don't play the I see people as equal stuff. Just come out and tell me I like what Trump is doing with immigrants because I agree with him about we don't want people from S-hole countries here. I agree with Tucker Carlson that immigrants are making our country dirtier. Just tell me you don't like the brown people, or at least you don't think they're good for our country. I would respect you way more than when you pretend that there are concrete and sensible policy reasons to support this garbage. And I have breaking news for you. Increasingly, you don't even really have to hide that that's the case. I know there may be people in the audience who say, David's kind of right. I do just not want brown people here, or I do turn the other cheek because this actually is aligned with my nationalist beliefs or whatever else. Trump's running on this type of bigotry now. So just come out of the closet, okay? Stop pretending. Just admit why it is that you love it. And we can go from there, and maybe we can have some real conversations about why you hold these views instead of continuing to tell all of these completely absurd stories that, quite frankly, no one with any common sense should be falling for in terms of why you support or defend the actions of Donald Trump, because there are no actual conservative values that are being defended with this nonsense. You're either propping up your personal greed and a sort of what's best for me point of view, or you're propping up your own xenophobia and racism. I just want to hear you tell it like it is. When you call into my show, as Trumpists do, don't play the games of, Trump really didn't have a role in the send her back thing. He did try to stop it right away, which is a lie, which we'll deal with later today. Just say, I like it. I do want to send them back. Those are my politics. And then we can actually talk like real adults once we establish what our positions are. Get away from these ridiculous, unbelievable talking points. The impeachment discussions about Donald Trump are getting both very concrete and much less, I guess, abstract by definition. The chairman of the House Judiciary is Congressman Jerry Nadler. Nadler is now saying that Robert Mueller's report contains, quote, very substantial evidence that Donald Trump is, quote, guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, you may know that there's a particular relevance to that term. High crimes and misdemeanors are impeachable offenses. And this is sort of setting the table for Robert Mueller's testimony later this week on Wednesday, where Nadler says Mueller must be allowed to spell this out in detail in front of the committee. If there were to be impeachment hearings, it would be Nadler's House Judiciary Committee which would lead them. And there is not agreement among the Democratic Party about whether they should pursue impeachment at this point. There are more than 80 Democrats who called for starting the impeachment inquiry immediately. There are some prominent Democrats like Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and Nadler himself who have been resistant to it. So the breaking news is not Nadler thinks there's evidence. Okay, I want to cut right to sort of like the core of what's important here. It's time for the impeachment discussion to become really specific and narrow, okay? Because it's not good, it's not healthy, it's not productive that every time some little thing happens, oh, now might be the time for impeachment, but it might not. And Pelosi says no, and who knows who says yes. I've been saying for months now that there should be an impeachment inquiry. That starts in the House, and that should start immediately or as soon as possible. That's been my position. Get the contents of the Mueller report out in public. Make everything in the report known to as many people as possible. But Democrats need to make a decision about this, and they need to make that decision very soon. Robert Mueller testifies Wednesday. If the content of the report justifies an impeachment inquiry, which I believe it does, remember the inquiry is just step one in the entire process, then that inquiry should start immediately after Robert Mueller's testimony. I happen to believe, having read the report, that the contents do justify an impeachment inquiry. If it's time to do it, then let's do it. If the idea, and this is a respectable position, some have the idea that it would be more damaging to Donald Trump to start the impeachment inquiry in, say, 6 months, because the 2020 election will be more ramped up at that point in time. There would be more disruption of Trump's campaign to be done at that time, when right now it's really just the Democratic primary that's getting attention. That's fine. Let's come to that agreement and let's shut our mouths about it until that point. The constant back and forth, the Democrats fighting with each other about impeachment inquiry versus not, it will not help remove Trump in 2020. The most effective path forward would be let Mueller speak on Wednesday, publicize what he says, and allow the truth of that testimony to foment a deserved outrage in the United States. We're going to learn much more very soon about the Jeffrey Epstein case. And it is quite possible that Donald Trump will be implicated in some of those documents in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not for the alleged child rape that Donald Trump was accused of, but possibly. Let's get that information out into the open and allow that to grow the outrage in the country. This could easily build for the next 5 to 7 months. And then it could be the perfect time to start the impeachment inquiry when it would be most damaging to Donald Trump. Now, some of you will hear me talking about this and you'll be outraged, concerned, trolling. David, are you suggesting that Dems play politics with the timing of something as serious as impeachment? Yeah, I am. That's what I'm doing. We need to win, okay? The right plays politics with the lives of undocumented immigrants seeking asylum. The right plays politics with the lives of civilians in Iran as Donald Trump authorizes and then cancels a strike on Iran. They play politics with debt and deficit and taxes and health care. I'm saying it's okay to play politics with the timing of the impeachment inquiry, plus or minus a few months. Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's time to stop losing. If calculating the timing of an impeachment inquiry in order to most damage Trump is what we have to do, it is nothing compared to what they've done. But Democrats need to decide what the plan is like now, because the worst possible thing they can do is just continue public infighting about it for the next 6 months or 12 months or all the way to the 2020 election. That's how Trump wins. I don't want him to win. So it's time to really think about it. Do we want to do it now? Do we want to do it in 6 months or not at all? And if that's the case, we focus on the 2020 election. But the infighting's got to stop and the back and forth has to end today. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Follow both of us there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, let me say thank you to Dan Harrison and Jeffrey Johnson. Dan and Jeffrey are today's new David Pakman Show members of the day. Membership is inexpensive. You get great stuff, including the daily bonus show. And most importantly, you're just supporting programs you like. I got an email from someone yesterday saying, I realized I'm spending $120 a month on a cable package. Most of the channels I don't even like or watch. It really makes much more sense to cancel that, keep internet for $60 and put that other 60 towards supporting shows I actually like that will get all or almost all of that money, a few bucks here, a few bucks there. And if that's your position, I would love for a few of those bucks to come to us. And you can sign up at www.joinpakman.com to make that a reality. Today's longtime sustaining member of the day is James Kelty. James has been with us for 5 years, dating all the way back to 2014, which is amazing. Thank you so much to all of you for supporting the show. So this next story has been sort of building, and it sort of hit a peak over the weekend. Bernie Sanders is having a problem with his own staff because he's advocating for a $15 minimum wage as policy nationally. But he has some staffers that, as a result of the number of hours that they're working, are on average earning under $15 per hour. And there's been a ton of commentary about this story. There's been some good points made. There's been some sort of misguided points made. So I want to try to break it down clearly and simply for you. On the policy side, Bernie Sanders has proposed a $15 minimum wage as a wage floor for every worker. That's a policy that not just Bernie Sanders supports. Bernie Sanders has also made a big deal of pointing out that his campaign staff, unlike the staffs of many others, his campaign staff is unionized and they bargain collectively. Not very common for presidential campaigns. I believe Elizabeth Warren's campaign staff is unionized. I don't know who else's is, but I know that the two of their campaign staffs are. And it is true that hourly workers working for Bernie Sanders, based on the research I found, are earning $15 or more per hour. But there are folks who are on salary. For example, field staff with Bernie's campaign have a salary of $36,000 per year. Not a high salary in many parts of this country, not even really a living wage in some of the big cities and urban areas. But if you're working 40 hours a week and you earn $36,000 and you assume a 50-week year, most people get 2 weeks of vacation. I know not everybody, but in these types of salaried positions, that's not uncommon. That works out to $18 per hour. Okay, this is where you get that simple calculation. Often people say, a $20 an hour salary is $40,000 a year. And the way you get that is 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. That's how the simple math ends up working out. Okay. The problem is that in practice, Bernie's staff, like the staffs of many campaigns, are not working 40 hours a week. They're working 60 or sometimes even more. And even with 2 weeks vacation a year, $36,000 at 60 hours per week becomes only $12 an hour. This is barely more than the minimum wage in some places. And it's certainly below $15, which is what Bernie Sanders himself advocates for. So is this a problem? Yes. Is this a sort of hypocrisy? Absolutely. What about overtime pay is one question that has come up. There are a lot of exclusions for who qualifies for overtime. And currently, if you earn more than $35,000, overtime is not mandatory. And because Bernie's staffers earn $36,000, coincidentally, they don't qualify for mandatory overtime. So there's a few important stories here. One story is when we talk about raising the top marginal tax rate, lots of people on the right say, listen, if you think that your taxes should be higher, you can pay more in taxes. The IRS will gladly take your money. Don't make everybody pay more. Just send in more money if you think that the rich should be taxed at a higher rate. This is a perfect example of how you could say the same thing. Listen, Bernie could say, I will start paying people even more than I have to. But then he ends up hurting his campaign, right? If the law doesn't say you have to pay more and your opponents aren't paying more, all Bernie does by paying more is hurt his own chances of becoming the eventual president by paying more in salaries and having less money for campaign ads, rallies, travel, whatever else. Now, that's not a defense of Bernie. I think this is wrong. I want to be super clear. But it's an attack on the idea that we don't need to regulate these things. The free market will figure it all out. If Bernie really wants to pay everybody more, then he'll do it. If Bernie decides to pay everyone more and no one else does because they don't have to, Bernie's campaign suffers. And if we believe Bernie has the best ideas, as many people in my audience do, he is hurting his own chances of making those ideas a reality as president. So as I've said before, there needs to be regulation around these issues. This also gives us insight into the reality that the minimum wage is not a tool that fixes every problem. It's smart for people like Bernie and Andrew Yang to say, look, Amazon's paying no taxes. We've got to break up the big banks. We've got to go after Facebook and Google. That's all true, and it's smart for them to do it. For smaller businesses that are much more sensitive to price changes in materials or labor, we just have to be aware that a higher minimum wage isn't a true solution. It is in some cases a Band-Aid. It has to be wielded carefully. The Bernie campaign is a perfect example. This does not exculpate Bernie personally in any way. Do I think Bernie is wrong not to make sure that everybody is getting an effective minimum wage of $15 per hour on his campaign? I think that's wrong. And I understand the position that he is in as well. It appears his solution is going to be not to pay more, but to simply reduce the number of hours that people are working from 60 to 40 or to 45 or whatever, so that they end up making effectively $15 an hour and spending less time campaigning. Understand that that has an impact. This only invigorates my discussion over the last couple of weeks about the minimum wage is a tool that solves some problems in some situations. We absolutely need a minimum wage in the context of the economy that we have, but it is at best a Band-Aid in some situations and not a catch-all solution that we have to continue to go beyond and think about. The relationship between people and the jobs they do is going to have to be rethought given all of the economic changes that have been happening in the last 40 years, including stagnant wages for the bottom 50% or more, and coming technological automation and so many other things. To be clear, I hate that I have to do this. I don't like to condescend to the audience. I'm not defending what Bernie is doing, okay? Bernie should be making sure everybody earns an effective wage of $15 an hour. It was a truly wacky weekend out of the White House. Donald Trump suffering a bizarre and strange meltdown over a story from the Washington Post about tweets, and it caused him to send out even crazier tweets. So on Saturday, the Washington Post wrote about Donald Trump's racist tweets. On Sunday, almost like a full day later, Trump spent his morning losing his mind over the Washington Post story. And one of the themes of that Washington Post article, which was extensively sourced, despite the tweets you're about to see, Washington Post did a really good job. 26 White House aides, advisors, lawmakers, and others who were involved in handling Trump's response to the whole go back to their original countries fiasco basically shared the same perspective with the Washington Post. And the perspective was Trump didn't and doesn't even understand why what he said and did was controversial and problematic. Like the guy just genuinely doesn't get it. The Washington Post story, tweeted Donald Trump, about my speech in North Carolina and tweet with its phony sources who do not exist is fake news. The only thing people were talking about is the record-setting crowd and the tremendous enthusiasm, far greater than the Democrats, you'll see in 2020. So the North Carolina rally he's referring to is that rally where the crowd chanted "Send her back" when Donald Trump mentioned ethnic minority Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. And Trump stood there looking quite pleased and making no effort to interrupt it, which will play an important role later on in the show. Then on Sunday morning, Donald Trump tweeted, quote, "presidential harassment," which is Trump's code word for a free press reporting about what the president does, and as an integral and key part of our system of government, not an institution that we should be attacking. That's what Trump means when he says presidential harassment. He doesn't like a free press. And then a couple of minutes later, Donald Trump tweeting again, quote, "I don't believe the 4 congresswomen are capable of loving our country. They should apologize to America and Israel for the horrible, hateful things they have said. They are destroying the Democrat Party, but are weak and insecure people who can never destroy our great nation." So let's explore this for what it is. When Trump calls something fake news, that is a statement that is of no value. Trump has said, he's admitted that fake news is news he doesn't like or news that is critical of him. So that ship has sailed. Calling something fake news is of no meaning or value whatsoever. The problem is that the meme of fake news has metastasized. We have a poll which shows that 42% of Republicans believe that a story that is accurate but critical of the president is, quote, fake news. That's the crisis. That's one of the crises. The other crisis is that, once again, the constant and never-ending misunderstandings about free speech and censorship, and most importantly, in this case, press freedom, are truly damaging to our democracy. Free speech does not mean freedom from the consequences of speech. I've said this before. Many of you will find it repetitive. Donald Trump seems to think that he can say outrageous, racist, xenophobic things, and that for it to be free speech, it has to be immune from any consequences, which includes media writing stories about it. The speech that is people and media reacting to Trump and what Trump says is just as important as Donald Trump's speech itself. It's arguably more important, I would actually argue, because Trump has the power and the influence of the bully pulpit as president of the United States. It's the role of people, it's the role of voters, it's the role of media to counteract those things when necessary or desirable. Lastly, as usual, Donald Trump seemingly very wound up by lots of bad things going on for him this week. That is another, in the back of all these things, when you look at the timing, it took 24 hours for Donald Trump to start tweeting about this Washington Post article. Why? Well, it was Sunday going into what may not be a good week for Donald Trump. Robert Mueller is scheduled to testify Wednesday. We will see if that ultimately happens. Every indication that it will. And obviously, Donald Trump is panicking. Documents from the original Jeffrey Epstein case may be unsealed, and it's likely that Trump figures in those documents. Number 3, the Iran fiasco has just completely imploded on Trump. And Trump has now been personally implicated in hush money payments in some newly released documents. So it's not been a good week. It's shaping up to be a very bad week for Donald Trump. And we have to understand that every time these tweet storms happen that seem to make not much sense, especially when it's been like a full day, could have been that he saw something on Fox News that reminded him of it. Don't want to, ignore that possibility. but there is almost always a scandal that Donald Trump is eager to distract from, and unhinged tweets to take control of the news cycle are a common way that he tries to do that. Make sure you are following me on Instagram at david.pakman. I posted a little video of our number of YouTube subscribers slowly climbing. We're set to hit 700,000 YouTube subscribers today. Check that out on my Instagram. And while you're there, follow the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
A police officer suggested that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez deserves to be shot and called her a vile idiot. And the term of the day for this story is stochastic terrorism. That's really the story here, and I'm going to get to that. The officer's name is Charlie Rispoli. According to a Louisiana publication, he has been on the Gretna, Louisiana police force since 2005. And he posted to his Facebook page, quote, "This vile idiot needs a round, and I don't mean the kind she used to serve." Of course, referring not to a round of drinks. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez used to be a bartender, but rather to a round as in ammunition. He's talking about bullets. She needs a bullet, is what a police officer is saying. The police chief says it's a disturbing post, and if accurate, it does violate the police department's social media policy. But, and here's the thing I want to focus on, the police chief says it's not an actual threat against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from the police officer. Presuming, I guess, that the police officer means, I don't believe the police officer is likely to find and shoot Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And that's what I want to talk about. We can talk about all the obvious stuff. The cop should not be on the police force. How do you trust this guy to keep your neighborhood safe if he has the poor judgment to suggest on the internet under his name, under his real name, that not that it's any better to do it anonymously, but I mean, it shows sort of like a lack of judgment as well to think it's going to have no consequences, to suggest publicly that a member of Congress be shot. We would all mostly agree that even if you don't like AOC's politics, this guy shouldn't be suggesting she be shot. She shouldn't be shot. And a police officer in particular saying that is wrong and should be removed from the police force. Let's focus, though, on this isn't a real threat. OK, this is really important. This type of defense might make sense until you are enlightened about stochastic terrorism. I've talked about this many times before. I think this even came up on my Joe Rogan appearance. Stochastic terrorism is when someone goes and commits a crime. They commit an act of terror, a shooting, a killing, whatever. They appear to have acted completely alone. They are apparent lone wolves. But in fact, they were influenced by a broader movement or an ideology that they weren't personally in contact with, at least not in terms of like a two-way communication. So if I have a TV show with a big audience and I rant and rave every day about someone's got to do something about AOC, and some guy that watches but doesn't know me personally starts to think it's a good idea to do something about AOC, and then that guy goes and does something, that is a stochastic terrorist. I'm not legally guilty as the host, at least not under current law, but my statement to an audience, when the audience is big enough, becomes statistically more and more likely to influence someone to actually go out and do something like this. And right now, it is the president who is doing this. So understand the cycle here. Trump rants and raves about the un-American, bad congresswomen who hate the U.S. They should go back to their, quote, original countries. People at a crowd react by literally chanting, "Send her back," about one of those congresswomen, Ilhan Omar, in that case. And the defense that we heard from the right is they weren't literally saying deport her. It was more symbolic. It was, we disagree with her agenda. Well, it might be all fun and games, except now here's a cop influenced by this entire anti-AOC apparatus, and he goes and posts on Facebook, AOC should be shot. The defense from his own police chief, well, the comment wasn't okay, violates our policy, but this is not an actual threat that the police officer is going to find and shoot Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez personally. But then someone could go and see all of this stuff and then really go and do it in real life, because that's exactly how stochastic terrorism works, by fomenting this environment where these ideas are repeated in more and more places. Not only do we hear it from the president, we're seeing it even from our local police. I mean, look at all these people that think something should be done. Maybe I should be the person to go and do it. The perpetuators of the rhetoric can hide behind a microphone or behind a social media page or behind the supposedly symbolic nature of these statements and say it's hypothetical. This is not advice to anybody. But statistically, you have to understand stochastic terrorism. You are increasing the chances that someone goes and really does shoot someone. Am I saying it should be illegal to have a show in which you say something needs to be done about AOC because somebody who is arguably potentially unstable goes and does something? No, I'm not saying that. This is not me repressing speech or suggesting speech be repressed or suppressed in any legal way. What I'm saying is these ideas that we can just dance around with coy language and then say it's all symbolic, it's hypothetical, it's just another way of saying we disagree with her policies and hiding behind that. It's absolutely ridiculous. I saw Dilbert creator Scott Adams, who I've interviewed, a great defender of Trump, doing this on Twitter. He said, no one is literally suggesting sending Ilhan Omar back to Somalia. This is symbolism in politics, that all. The rhetoric being normalized actually puts people in danger, and it should stop. It needs to stop right away, and we need to call it out clearly for what it is. We'll see what ultimately happens to this police officer. I don't know what his future holds, at least not based on the sort of mealy-mouthed comment from his police chief. There is a stunning double standard that I want to talk about today with this idea of leave the USA if you don't like it, which Donald Trump has started talking about more and more lately. And at the same time, Donald Trump has a different message for immigrants from other countries where he says, no, if there are problems in your country, if there are things you don't like in your country, you shouldn't come to the US. You should stay there and fix those problems. So let me reset this for you so we all know what I'm talking about here. I told you last week that Donald Trump's latest slogan, love it or leave it, about people who don't like things that are happening in the United States, is straight out of the KKK's 1970s playbook. There were billboards in all sorts of places where the Ku Klux Klan would use this slogan in the 1970s, in North Carolina, also in other states, love it or leave it. And it was about being against communism, and I forget the other intention that it had, but it was relevant to the politics at the time that the KKK was getting behind. Trump has adopted this slogan and this idea now, and he's increasingly taking the approach that if the ethnic minority, Democratic congresswomen, or whoever aren't pleased with something that's going on in the United States, they should just move to another country that they like better. They don't need to try to change the United States. Love it or leave it. If you don't like it, then just go somewhere else. But then at the same time, when Donald Trump is faced with the reality that we have many immigrants who are coming to the United States, fleeing their home countries, seeking asylum, his view becomes completely different. Oh, no, they shouldn't fall under the love it or leave it umbrella. If they don't like what's going on in their home country, they should stay there and fix the problems of their country so that then their country would be better and they would no longer be interested in coming to the United States. That's exactly what people are trying to do here in the United States, right? Trump says immigrants should fix their home countries rather than go to a different country. It would be immigrants to the United States. Let me say it a different way. Foreigners should stay in their home countries and try to fix them rather than coming to the United States. Well, that's what people in the United States are trying to do. And you're telling them, if you don't like what's going on here, go somewhere else. When we call for changing our immigration policy, we're trying to fix our country. To say, if you don't like it, go somewhere else is antithetical to what this country was founded on. We want to change the healthcare system here so that we can live here and have healthier people and people who can work in ways that are not impacted by whether they're going to lose health insurance, mediocre as it might be, by quitting their job. We're staying in our country and trying to change it. But in those cases, Trump's advice is go to Europe or go to some other place that has the healthcare system that you're describing. No, this is the entire point. We want to improve the country. We're not trying to bail out and go somewhere else. So this fundamentally comes down to yet another one of these double standards. I know that why even mention it at this point? The Republican Party under Trump has become completely immune to double standards. No one could possibly support Trump if they cared about double standards. So we've got to go beyond that. This is about how politics works. OK, if we allow this narrative of if you have so many complaints, why don't you just leave? If we allow that to become valid political discourse, we are allowing one of the fundamental roles of politics to be perverted. The reason people vote in elections, the reason we have elections is so that if you're not happy with what's taking place here, you can change it. OK, there are so many ideas that this president pushes that are fundamentally anti-American. We've talked about most of them. Threats to the press, recently saying he would take help from Russia or China in 2020. Sure, why not? The way we're treating asylum seekers, it's all anti-American. But one of the most anti-American ideas that's been flowing out of this White House's collective mouth is the idea that if you don't like what's happening here, you should leave and go elsewhere. There's nothing more American than being an activist for the type of country you want to have. And I'll go even further. Donald Trump spent Barack Obama's presidency slamming Obama about all the things that were wrong with the United States of America. He ran on making America great again by changing it from Obama's America. By his own logic, right? He should be leaving if he doesn't like it. He didn't like it under Obama. He should have left. Instead, he ran for president and won. So, of course, it's a talking point. Of course, it's ignorant rhetoric from the White House. Love it or leave it. But it is so fundamentally anti-American that we can't give him an inch on this one. Don't like it, leave? No. It's if you don't like it, you try to change it. Just like Trump did in 2016, just like we've been doing for hundreds of years. So it's really important. Help me on this one. We cannot allow the love it or leave it idea. I know the slogan is cartoonishly a KKK slogan revitalized by Donald Trump, as he has done with so many nationalist slogans and mottos over the last couple of years. I understand that. The idea of it cannot be allowed to infiltrate American politics because it is so destructive and so anti-American. Make sure you give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Approaching 100,000 likes on Facebook, which the kids these days tell me no longer matters. The kids are all off Facebook now. But apparently, to people my age, Facebook is still sort of cool. So anyway, give us a like there. Quick break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Sometimes it's good to sort of step back a little bit and add some context to some of these fast-moving stories that will consume the news cycle for 24 hours or 48 hours, or in the case of the send 'em back chant at a North Carolina Trump rally, it's really been almost like a 2-week or 10 or 12 day story in total. So remember last week at a rally in North Carolina, Donald Trump mentioned Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. The crowd starts chanting, "Send her back." Here's a quick reminder of what that was like.
And she talked about the evil Israel.
So this completely implodes on Trump. It creates really almost like 5 uninterrupted days of criticism of the White House, which was in full damage control mode almost immediately. Found out about this from the Washington Post article with 26 sources about Trump didn't even really seem to understand what it was that was problematic about what went down and what he said and how he reacted and what he tweeted. So eventually it got through to Trump that you probably want to distance yourself from the chant at least. So Trump took the position of, I didn't like the chant. And in fact, as is always the case with Trump, he goes too far. He could say, in retrospect, I didn't like the chant, but he goes too far and says, I tried to stop it right away. I made super clear that I didn't like the chant in the moment, which of course, if you look at the video, is not clear whatsoever. Check out what he said. Again, this is just meaningless damage control. Donald Trump trying to say anything that at the time seems like it might help him. And he says all sorts of stuff that just isn't true, including that he started talking very quickly. So MSNBC did a side-by-side with a counter showing exactly how long it was that Trump was silent as the chant continued. Take a look.
Mr. President, if I may, when your supporters last night were chanting, send her back, why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you ask them to stop saying that?
Well, number one, I think I did. I started speaking very quickly. It really was a loud, I disagree with it, by the way, but it was quite a chant, and I felt a little bit badly about it. But I will say this, I did, and I started speaking very quickly, but it started up rather fast, as you probably noticed.
Okay, so he's telling us he didn't like the chant. The chant was bad, so he claims. But then Trump says, well, I didn't like the chant, but the people chanting are great people and are great patriots. Where did we hear this before? Here's Donald Trump not on the chant, but on the chanters.
I'm unhappy with the fact that a congresswoman, in this case, a different congresswoman, can call our country and our people garbage. That's what I'm unhappy with. Those people in North Carolina, that stadium was packed. It was a record crowd, and I could have filled it 10 times, as you know. Those are incredible people. Those are incredible patriots. But I'm unhappy when a congresswoman goes and said, I'm going to be the president's nightmare.
By the way, Trump said it was a record crowd. What does that even mean at this point? Obviously not true. A demonstrable lie, one that Trump often likes to tell. But there was nothing record-breaking about the crowd whatsoever, no matter how you measure it. But the important thing here is Trump says almost back to back, he didn't like the chant. He tried to stop the chant. He resumed his speech quickly to interrupt the chant, all of which are not true. But then he also says the people in the crowd doing the chanting, those are great people. Those are patriots. How does this compute? The chant was disgusting and terrible. The people who came up with the chant, truly lovely, great patriots. These are the sorts of contradictions that come up when the president's word means nothing. I mean, truly nothing. Murder is absolutely disgusting. It's terrible. I don't know why anyone would ever commit such a horrible act. But that room full of murderers, those are great people. I mean, truly lovely, patriotic, great people. The murders themselves, though, I disagree with. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? And it almost is like a philosophical discussion, which couldn't possibly be what Donald Trump is trying to stimulate here, because the guy has no clue about philosophy whatsoever. It's more like a reverse double down. Send her back, looks pleased in the moment, lets it go on. Reaction to send her back is disastrous for Trump. He says, I didn't like the chant. I interrupted the chant quickly, which isn't true. But then it gets us to say, oh, okay, so you're upset with the people who were chanting, right? Because you didn't like the chant. Oh, no, the problem's not the people. The people were great. It was a record-sized crowd full of patriots, but the chant is what I disagree with. For all of the opposition to postmodernism that this new right claims to have, they sure to seem to see language and words as having completely malleable, fluid meaning that can be shaped like clay to mean or not mean whatever it is that's convenient to them at the time. Complete and utter contradiction. If you care about double standards, if you care about consistency, you're probably already not voting for Donald Trump. This is really funny video of Donald Trump stepping in it again, but this time it's much more innocuous. It's not a crisis. It's just funny ignorance and lack of context, but it actually relates to a really serious issue related to one of the most important issues we deal with as a human species right now, and that is climate change and pollution and what we're doing to our country. So let's start with the clip, and then talking about it will be even more illuminating after we watch. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube that you've hit the subscribe button to our channel right now. Trump was asked about the plastic straw controversy, and here's what he had to say.
I do think we have bigger problems than plastic straws. You know, it's interesting about plastic straws. So you have a little straw, but what about the plates, the wrappers, and everything else that are much bigger, and they're made of the same material? So the straws are interesting. Everybody focuses on the straws. There's a lot of other things to focus, but it's an interesting question.
You know, the plates are usually not plastic anymore. So at any place that's worried about plastic straws, it's probably paper plates. But that's just Trump being out of touch. He's probably still in the mindset of the styrofoam food containers or something. Who knows? So there are like three interesting layers here because this is just some dumb Trump statement, but there's actually important stuff here. Trump, under the belief that the straws are plastic, but so are the plates and the cups and everything, is sort of saying, like, to really deal with the plastic problem, you might have to consider banning the plates and the utensils and the cups and everything else because the straws are really small. He seems almost like open to the idea of banning all plastic implements of this kind. Like he's sort of saying banning only plastic straws doesn't go far enough. That's interesting because it doesn't sound like it would be Donald Trump's politics. Now, the backstory about the straws specifically is that the reason straws have gotten so much attention is that every day 500 million of these plastic straws are used once and they're thrown away. Because they're small, people often don't even put them in trash cans so that they contribute a lot to street trash. They get into waterways. It's terrible for animals. And they're not recyclable anyway in most cases because of their small size and they contain such little plastic. So they wreak havoc. So that part makes sense. That's why straws have become a thing. There's been a movement to replace plastic straws, either by having people carry around their own reusable metal straw, to only give customers straws when they've asked for them instead of bringing them to everybody. There are some alternative straws made of like paper and bamboo and different things. Every one I've tried is truly terrible. Some coffee shops I go to have switched to these for iced drinks, and they just fall apart into mush within 10 minutes. So it's true that while the straws aren't a lot of plastic, the things Trump is mentioning often are paper, and the large plastic items are recyclable. So he just doesn't get why people are even talking about straws. Okay. The really important message here is no matter what we as individuals do in terms of consumer choices like these, if we don't have big picture wholesale change to pollution, resource usage, and energy usage, this stuff is a drop in the bucket. And that's why all of these consumer movements are fine to the extent that they'll inform people. Hopefully they will impact human behavior in some way that makes a small change. But Trump is sort of getting at the idea that, listen, we're not going to solve the climate crisis, that is, with straws. We need to be thinking way bigger. The problem is Trump's against most of those way bigger picture changes that need to be made. He's trying to revitalize an industry that should be allowed to die, both because it's failing and it's terrible for the environment. The coal mining industry, just as one example. Trump's reducing benefits or trying to reduce financial benefits on electric cars. He is completely right that if we have this myopic focus on straws, we're missing the bigger picture. He just doesn't understand how we're missing the bigger picture, and he's against most of the bigger picture changes that would need to be made. If we even want to look just at like landfills, right? If you just look at solid waste landfills, it's obviously mostly not straws or even items for eating food. It's electronics products, it's wood and large industrial plastics. If we zoom out and look at the bigger picture of solid waste beyond just consumer, we're talking about industry and manufacturing and construction that are generating just untold amounts of waste, way bigger than straws. We zoom out a little more and you realize if we really want to fix this issue, we've got to look at energy usage and then figure out where is energy usage coming from. And this dwarfs the straw issue. So my point is not laugh at the plastic straw people or laugh at Trump for what he said. The plastic straw people have a specific cause. It's a logical one. Trump seems to be identifying that the straw issue is not the be all end all. The bring your own grocery bag movement. It's a good movement. But what we have to realize is that we have to be thinking way, way bigger than these retail level consumer choices, which are important. But if we want to make real change happen, and this is why lots of corporations end up getting behind these movements, we need to look at industry and we need to look at transportation big picture and we need to look at energy. This is why a lot of big corporations will say, oh yeah, we're fully behind the plastic straw thing going to paper or only bringing straws when people ask for them. They are appearing to be part of the solution, while the real problem, which is the much broader use of energy, transportation, fossil fuels that these huge corporations contribute to, that gets ignored every time the attention gets put on straws. So Trump is right. Straws are not the solution, but he's against most of the solutions that really would make a big impact. We have a voicemail number. That number is 2192-DAVID-P. I'm going to play this voicemail for you with a total neutrality, in the sense that I am not going to prejudge for you whether this is a serious voicemail or it is someone who's trolling me. I have an opinion. Okay, let's take a listen to it together.
Hi there, David. I don't understand why you think Trump is a KKK member. The Democrats started the KKK. Hillary Clinton loved Robert Byrd. Look him up. He was a grand wizard of the KKK. Where is your history? I don't think you do any kind of studying. How did you do in school when you don't even know your history? Trump has taken down pedos big time. What do you think the Q movement is all about? Pedophilia. Who do you think is running this government and the world? A bunch of pedos. Look up George Nader, who was just finally busted for screwing a 11-year-old boy or something. A 14-year-old was with him from Europe. He screws little babies. They have it on his phone that they caught him with. Trump was behind that. Also Epstein. Who do you think has taken down Epstein? Trump. He hates Epstein.
Yeah. So listen, it goes on for 2 more minutes. Do you think that is genuine, or do you think it is not? I'll now give you my opinion. I believe that is completely genuine. In looking at the caller ID and the call history of that individual, they have slowly become wackier and wackier. And I believe that is not a parody. I know that for some of you, it's hard to believe that that's a real person that exists in the world. That is my best assessment based on everything I know. If you are shocked by that, then maybe you're not paying attention, because that is what we are up against right now. Pedos, QAnon, conspiracies. Why did you say Trump is in the KKK? I never did. I mean, this is someone whose brain has rotted out. This is the equivalent of if you just have candy every day and sugar sodas and you never brush your teeth. And then 4 years later, you wake up and you know what's going on with your teeth. The equivalent has happened from putting the whatever is analogous informationally to sugar sodas and sugar candy in your brain is what has happened to this caller. And I believe it is 100% real. Send me your thoughts if you disagree. Great bonus show for you today. Become a member, become a patron. I'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.